Hello, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where in the world you are. My name is Matt, and I am one of the directors and co-founders at CyberDuck. We are a user experience and technology-focused digital transformation agency, and I'm going to be your host for this session. First of all, thank you very much for taking the time to join us for today's CyberDuck Roundtable. Today, we're going to be chatting about accessibility, the principles behind it, and how to apply that in practice. Before we start, a little bit of housekeeping from me. First, we've been joined by Lynn and Carol, who are British Sign Language interpreters. So if you need to, you can pin them to your screen by clicking on the three dots on their video and selecting Pin to Screen. Live captioning is also being provided. If it hasn't been automatically turned on for you and you need it, you can switch this on using the live transcript button located at the bottom of your screen and selecting Show Subtitle. We're also recording this session, so everyone who has signed up will receive an email next week, providing them with access to the on-demand video version of the session. That's all of the housekeeping out of the way. So now on to the session. I doubt it surprises most of you that a vast majority of digital services and products today still fail basic accessibility requirements. A study by WebAIM as recent as 2019 found that 98% of the top 1 million web pages fail to conform with WCAG and ADA. You balance this against the fact that 15% of the global population live with a disability. This is over 1 billion people, a billion people who are being excluded from services and products. And despite this, often accessibility is simply treated as a bolt-on and a step in a checklist. Businesses really should be treating accessibility as an essential part of their website and digital strategy, not just because it's the law, because it's the right thing to do. So I've got an expert panel here with me today, and they're going to help us navigate the principles and process of creating a great, accessible and inclusive products and services. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to ask you, the audience, to get involved in this roundtable as much as possible. So if you've got a burning question about accessibility, perhaps a challenge you're currently facing on the project you're involved in, we'd love to hear it. Please pop your questions in the chat, and I will do my best to put your questions to our team of experts. Alternatively, if Twitter is more your thing, please pop your questions on Twitter using the hashtag A11YDuck hashtag. That's A11YDuck hashtag, and I'll be keeping an eye on that too. So now to introduce our fantastic panelists. We have Deborah Ruh, CEO and founder of Ruh Global Impact and chairwoman of Billion Strong. Mike Gifford, senior strategist at CivicActions and Drupal core accessibility maintainer. Laurie DeBon-Coyers, user experience evaluator at RNIB. Steve Green, director and accessibility specialist at Test Partners. And last, but by no means least, CyberDuck's very own Ramon Lepenta, front-end technical lead. So let's get into it. Starting with Deborah, please tell us a little bit more about yourself in 1 to 2 minutes and why this topic matters to you.
Well, thank you so much for showing this leadership here, because this matters, because we need people that are doing the work you are doing to embed accessibility from the very beginning and keep it going all the way through. So I am Deborah Ruh, and the CEO of Ruh Global Impact. We are a think tank working with large multinational corporations to make sure that people with disabilities are meaningfully included, and also very proud to be the co-founder and chairwoman of Billion Strong, billion-strong.org, which is, I believe, the first global organization to focus on identity and empowerment of people with disabilities. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Deborah. Mike, over to you.
Great. So Mike Gifford, now with CivicActions. Prior to that, I was the CEO of Open Concept Consulting, but was acquired in November, and happy to be part of this team at CivicActions and able to focus more on accessibility. Most people know me through the Drupal community and through open source communities, and trying to, with the work we've been doing to try and improve Drupal.org so that Drupal is the most accessible CMS out there to, out of the box. And I think we've done a great job with that, but there's still more to do. Back in 2009, when I started improving Drupal's accessibility, I thought we'd be able to fix it in 1 or 2 yeah, maybe a year or two, we'd fix up all the issues. Here we are now, and you know, the list of issues in Drupal is larger than ever, but we're still making progress on it, and we're getting, the issues are more minute and less critical than they were initially. So it's great to be part of this journey and to be part of a large global community working on improving and embracing accessibility. And the reason I'm excited about this is that you know, accessibility is really, it's a solvable issue. It's a complex problem, but we can fix this. And so I'm really happy to be part of a team of a community of people around the world that is working to actually fix this problem in all kinds of different pieces of software, and with all different approaches to engaging with that technology.
Thanks, Mike. Laurie, over to you.
Okay, hello, I'm Laurie Dibon-Cognes. I work as a user experience evaluator at the Royal National Institute of Blind People. I've been working there since 2012. My daily job is looking at accessibility and usability for, first of all, people with sight loss, but more generally, people with disabilities, which could be digital website apps, but even products like talking televisions or helping, for example, the Bank of England with their tactile markings on the banknotes, or other products like in-home displays to check your, you know, how much energy you use and so on. So a variety of products, but in the last few years, looking at mainly at making apps and websites more accessible and more usable. I think usability is a good word to use. It doesn't mean that if something is accessible, it's actually easy to use. And we're trying to stress that by involving users throughout the process.
Thanks, Laurie. Over to you, Steve.
I'm Steve Green, Managing Director of Test Partners and a Principal Accessibility Consultant. I've been doing accessibility testing, training and consultancy for about 19 years now, and I'm still very much hands-on, up to my eyes in code all day. Sort of things I doing WCAG audits, assistive technology testing, user testing with disabled people, accessible document remediation. There's all kinds of different strands. So that's my main focus more than the sort of organizational things.
Thanks, Dave. And again, last but not least, Ramon.
Ramon Lopenta here. I've been building things for the web for close to 20 years now, and half of that time has been at CyberDoc. And I think for the last few years, me and Matt initially started championing accessibility efforts at the company, trying to, you know, impart the education across the whole team, because with my background and our very, very diverse team at the company, is something that has been really important to us. And now we want to push that to everything that we do and everybody in the company.
Thanks, Ramon. So I'm going to kick things off until we start getting lots of questions come through on the chat. I'm going to start off with a broad question. What is the number one most important factor in making a good accessible product or service in your experience? And let's do this in reverse order. Ramon, I'll start with you.
The most important factor,
to you,
not ignore anything that comes in your way in terms of accessibility. I think the information that we get about it is very spread out, is sometimes can be confusing. Just don't ignore any of it, and make sure that you tackle all of the little things. The little things are very, very important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's those little details that really matter. Steve?
I'd say the most important factor is genuine support from the product owner or your management. Without that, you're not going to get the resources you need, and everyone else who wants to can weasel out of their responsibilities. And it doesn't matter how much you want to get things done. You just can't. So that support from above is essential.
Absolutely, I agree. Over to you, Laurie.
Consider accessibility from the start. We often get people come along and say, oh, we've made this lovely app, lovely website. There we are, test it for accessibility. And you think, no, it's going to be terrible. So, well, sorry, not always terrible, but often is. It's including accessibility from the beginning, from the design, every stage you need to think about it. It needs to become second nature. So it's not an afterthought at the end that you think, oh, wait a minute, let's do that. So that's my bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll touch on that more, I think, during this session. And as I mentioned in the introduction, I think sometimes it gets seen as a point in a checklist rather than necessarily something you do as a matter of process. So I definitely think we should touch on that more in this session. Mike?
Laurie stole half of what I was going to say. Good thing I thought of 2 points. The other one is looking at frameworks. Any libraries, anything you're starting with, if you know that you're starting with an accessible base, that the software that you're using to build on has accessibility built in, your job is going to be so much easier because you're not going to have to fix the mistakes of the other team and fight against that existing framework. So start with something that is accessible.
And lastly, Deborah. Thanks, Mike.
And I am joining from the United States, where we are heavily suing people over these issues. And so I would say, can you please remember why we're doing this? Laurie sort of talked about it, but I often see sometimes people just, especially in the States, looking at it from a compliance, wanting so much to check the box, when the reality is, why don't you really think about why we're doing this? We are doing this certainly to fully include people with disabilities, but accessibility benefits everyone when it's done right. So please remember why we're doing this. And by the way, how would you like to be left out of technology? I don't want to be left out. So can we remember why we're doing it?
That really segues very nicely onto the first question that's come through on the chat, which is from Mills. How would you best explain why accessible design is better for everyone, particularly in light of companies or organizations who just say, we don't need to do it because our users don't have accessibility needs? Who wants to take that one on? Deborah?
Yeah, I would love to take that on, because I remember I've been, I think like Steve mentioned, I've been doing this a long time. So I've been in this field 20 plus years, and I joined the field because I love technology, but because I also have a daughter with Down syndrome. I identify as a person with disabilities, ADHD, I'm too chatty. And my husband has acquired a disability as he's lived his life. And so at first I was really focused on the US corporations, the business case, and trying to shy away from the litigation. But I believe now, I think everybody should be sued that is not making things accessible. It's been going on way too long. I'm so impatient with corporations that don't want to include us now. And so I hear people talking about hiring people with disabilities, but if you haven't made your technology fully accessible, and by the way, take the time to understand the vendors that you're working with. You brought in some amazing people. RNIB is amazing. And I know here in the States, a lot of the US corporations prefer to work with RNIB, but also Mike Gifford is amazing. What Steve is doing with Test Partners is brilliant. Please take the time to make sure you're working with vendors that understand these issues. We're having some real problems with this in the States. A vendor saying, oh, all you have to do is these 3 little lines of code and woohoo, you're finished. No, you're not. Please don't do that. So, but the good news about it is the corporations, probably because of the litigation, are paying attention now. They have joined 500, have joined the Valuable 500, are committing to including people with disabilities. You can't include people with disabilities if technology is not accessible to us. So the good news about accessibility, though, is if English is not your first language, it'll benefit you. If you're multitasking, I'm sure nobody multitasks. If you're multitasking, it will benefit you. It benefits every single human being. It makes it more usable, as Laurie pointed out, how important it is to care about the users. So it's just no longer acceptable not to be focusing on accessibility from the very beginning. And I think, as Steve said earlier, or Ramon said, There's no little small parts. I'll have people say, well, okay, but what are the things we have to do? You have to do all of these things, all of them. So understand that society expects it, and we need to see more leaders like CyberDuck stepping up and saying, oh, we agree, and we're not going to build anything if it's not accessible. Thank you.
Anybody else want to add to what Deborah's just said there?
I'll include a link to this, but I'm really impressed by Microsoft's inclusive design initiative and the work that they've done to demonstrate that it's not just people with permanent disabilities, but also people with situational and temporary disabilities. This is really key because we have to remember that ultimately we're all human, unless there's any bots in the crowd. If there's bots, please stick up your hands. Because we're humans, we know that we age, and as we grow older, the functionality that we had when we were younger will degrade. That's just it. We are moving towards reduced functionality until we die. That is the human experience, as sad as it might be. So we need to embrace that and realize that we are going to prepare for our future selves. Even if we have the abilities today, we may not have them tomorrow. So be selfish and build for accessibility if you want to be here for a long and a good time.
Mike, you mentioned temporary and situational impairments. Do you mind sort of giving an example of that?
Absolutely. Let's say you've broken your wrist. Well, you wouldn't normally describe that as a disability, but if you're trying to use a mouse with your less dominant hand, it's very difficult. So that's a temporary disability. A situational disability is something like, it's a beautiful day. You want to go outside and read your emails and engage on Skype outside, but you can't see the screen because there isn't enough contrast because there's a glare from the sun. So that's like a situational disability. And there's lots of other ones for different devices, whether it's looking at background noise and tools like Alexa and Siri, or whether you're looking at things like just dealing with the pandemic life and having children running around that you have to grapple with. So you've got one child in one arm and trying to go off and navigate in another. Like, these are all things that impact real humans all the time. So it's not for 1 out of 5 of the population. It's really addressing 100% of people's needs, because we're not engaging with the web like we did in the 90s. This is fully integrated with our day-to-day life.
Thanks, Mike. Anyone else from the panelists? There was a supplementary question to that, which is, do you have a good non-digital analogy that helps explain why accessibility makes it better for everyone?
Here, I think it is very common to see, actually I think it's a law that you go to a building, any public building that doesn't have a ramp for wheelchair, for example, that will completely outcast quite a bunch of people that are not able to go up a set of stairs. And it's exactly the same. You're just leaving people out.
And we can say that, yeah, and we found that when we did the curb cuts, everybody started using them. The vendors that are bringing the potato chips to the stores, anybody with a rolling laptop bag. It goes back to what we said before. Accessibility and usability helps all human beings. And there's so many wonderful examples of technology that has been created for people with disabilities that now all of society uses in a lot of different ways, including ways we didn't intend, like captioning. Captioning benefits all of us. We were talking about that before we went on air, but it was created for people that are hard of hearing and deaf. But all of society benefits from captioning now, especially when you're in a noisy environment, you can't see the computer or the television screen. So another example too.
That's great. Deborah, you mentioned earlier about companies, and I think you're right here, companies being sued and having effectively accountability enforced on them as a good thing. Do any of the other panelists have any perspectives on that? Steve, perhaps?
Yeah, that's a much bigger thing in the States. We have some US clients, and I've been through a lawsuit. They weren't a client before they got sued, I hesitate to say. but it's very different in the UK and most of the rest of the world, actually. There's very low probability of getting sued anywhere outside the US. I think the one exception to that is the public sector in the UK, because we now have the public sector website accessibility regulations that came in 2018. And that has transformed things. I mean, as long ago as 2003, the UK government published a thick book on how the government was going to address sort of everything. And in it, it said all government websites must be accessible. And absolutely nothing happened, nothing changed for 15 years, despite having an e-government czar and this book and all these announcements. Nothing changed. Then, when the law was passed 3 years ago, we went from almost no public sector accessibility work for our first sort of 16 years. And in the last 3 years, we've worked for over 20 public sector organizations. And it's the threat of the random testing by GDS that is driving that. And it's given teeth to the legislation. So we've had the DDA, Disability Discrimination Act, since 1995, the Equality Act since 2010. But they didn't really have teeth. They required someone to be discriminated against and for that person to go to court with all the hassle and cost that entails. So almost nobody did. But with the public sector regs, GDS actively monitor about 1,500 public sector websites every year. And I'm not sure what the percentage is, but it's probably 1 or 2% of all public sector websites. So across, say, 5 years, you've probably got as much as a 10% chance of getting picked on for a random test. And if you don't respond well to that, GDS report you to the EHRC, who will take you to court. And that threat has been transformational. And now all public sector websites are amazingly accessible, at least the ones that have been tested and fixed. So that's really, I think, the lesson that other countries need to learn is give some teeth to your legislation.
That's it. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Obviously, culturally, US and say Europe are quite different regarding sort of litigation and things like that, and perhaps that's because of the law.
Well, there is a difference in the US. All of the lawsuits are being brought by ambulance chasing parasite lawyers for their own personal gain. It's got nothing to do with people with disabilities. It's pure just money grabbing. And it's not driven by the government or anything. It's just these lawyers.
Yeah,
I can see you want to come in there.
Yeah, unfortunately, something that affects, I mean, the culture of suing, it expands every part of the culture here. So,
well, I just want to say that was true, Steve, but it is not completely true across the board anymore, because we saw that happening in the United States. And yes, we are ridiculously messy. We create laws and then we sue each other and we cause a lot of divisions, us and thems. But at the same time, we did see a lot of ambulance chasers. But then we saw a lot of really good people like Lainey Feingold stepping up, and we saw attorneys joining her. And we started demanding, you're not just going to make a bunch of money. Even our judges are standing with that now. You're not just going to sue them and walk away and the website's still not accessible. You're going to take care of our community. So we put a lot of pressure on our lawyers, and that is now starting to shift. I'm not saying there's not ambulance chasers, there are, but our courts are starting to address that. If you chronically do it and you're not asking for it to be accessible, we have actually, other lawyers are stepping into this. So I just want to say that was the case. But it's not, there are actually some good lawyers in there. And I had one approach me a couple of years ago asking my company to teach them to do it. And I'm like, no, we're not playing. And they said, Deborah, what do you think would happen if we didn't have safety belts? Where do you think that came from? Came from lawsuits. Why do you think we have safety cameras when we back up so we don't accidentally back over our children? That came from lawsuits. So very messy, but at the same time, there are some positive things happening. Multinational corporations are now paying attention to this because they're scared to be sued. People, Steve says they're working in the United States because we don't have enough vendors in the US that know how to do this. So I keep telling our lawyers and investors, look outside the States. There's a lot of talent outside the States that we need helping us. So I just want to say we are addressing this as a community.
I just wanted to come in there. There's a report done in 2016 in the UK, the Click Away Pound, that was trying to quantify how much businesses were losing out by not being accessible. And that was, I think, 11 billion. They did it again 3 years later, 2019, and it was 7 billion. And they said, but although that was, the business case was made, the users that replied to the survey were finding inaccessible websites and apps nonetheless. So they were sort of coming to the conclusion that maybe a law like the one that Steve was talking about for the public sector needed to be applied for the private. So it's interesting where some people are thinking, just bringing in some people who've done the report and trying to highlight the business case, and even that is not getting the results that we want.
Oh, that's really interesting, Laurie, because I was going to say, could we flip it on its head, and rather than look at the stick, so to speak,
the carrot.
Is there a carrot side to this, in that where accessibility actually can be framed as an opportunity for businesses? But that rather disappointingly sounds to not be effective.
Yeah, although, there are cases, but obviously, in the past, I think there's the famous retail in the early 2000s that we worked with as well, then made a sort of what was then an accessible site in parallel to a mainstream website, which is obviously, not advocated, but at that time it was done. And it was, there were certain things that were put into the accessible website that made it easier. And so actually the revenue from the, was going up from people going to the accessible website. But, obviously the penny hasn't dropped because, we're still here.
Is there an argument besides sort of lawsuits and things like that for it to be more the PR side of it, for companies to be, I guess, sort of...
Well, Matt, even
emboldened to be more accessible?
Even easier than that. If we got Google to adjust the search rankings so that the results of those automated tests that they're already doing, that should influence how people rank. There should be no top ranked websites in Google that have anything less than 100% in their Google Lighthouse score. They've already got the infrastructure to do this. They just need to make it happen. And if they did that, we'd see it flip overnight, because as much as good PR is useful, being on the top of Google is more influential than any good PR you're going to get.
Thing is, there's a danger with that people will game the system, because that's always happened with SEO in the past, that they will fix that not by improving the accessibility, but by optimizing their Lighthouse score, whatever it takes to do that, which might be removing features or content, putting in some dodgy code that covers up what's really wrong. And that may be why they're not doing it. And over here we had precisely that with a company called SiteMorse, who have an automated tool that ranks all of the local council websites, hundreds of them, and they publish a league table. And some of the practices that councils were doing to get to the top of the table were working very much against good accessibility. And they were driven by wanting to get to the top of the league table. And it was actually hurting the accessibility, which was the complete opposite of what it was supposed to do. So
I have a bit of an extension in that, if I may. from that point, actually, it reminded me of a story that happened quite a few years ago, where at some point, if people will Google the word Facebook, the first result was not facebook.com. It came up an article, I think it was the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. It was a very big newspaper. And that article was coming up before actual facebook.com, and people were clicking on it and not putting comments on the article, being really confused about not being able to log into Facebook. What happened to Facebook? Why I can log in? Why did they change it? So I see that as an accessibility problem as well. Like if you do, it sounds like a good idea to do the accessibility rating as a measure for ranking. But if you do that overnight, it will trip so many people off that it can cause quite a bit of chaos as well. So I think, we probably need to be careful in how that. I love the concept of it, and I'm sure there's got to be a way to make it work.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's obviously multifaceted. That does lead me on to one question. Then I really want to go through some of the audience's questions. Some great questions going through. It leads me on to something which is obviously a hot topic at the moment, which is around automated accessibility tools. Now, obviously, there's tools where you can do testing on websites, but there are also tools that purport to be fixes for websites. I won't name them here. Panelists, feel free to name them, but like overlays and things like that. Well, I mean, is there a benefit to these things? What are the risks with these things, with these automated tools? Don't all rush at once.
I was holding back just in case anyone else wants to jump in. These things are terrible, and they're damaging because they don't do what they say they do. They fool the people who buy them into thinking that they've dealt with accessibility when they haven't. They take revenue away from what you could have genuinely fixed the website with the money that you're spending on these overlays. They are bad in every conceivable way. And to avoid any ambiguity, we are talking about Accessibility, Recite Me, and all of those sorts of things. Browse Aloud, Read Speaker. There's a whole load of them. Come and sue me. In fact, Carl Groves has put up a website where nearly 500 accessibility specialists, including some of us, have all signed this open letter to the world saying how terrible these overlays are. I happened to coincidentally do a WCAG audit on a website that had one recently, and it didn't address any of the things that were wrong with the website. And in fact, the overlay itself had some accessibility issues like bad color contrast. The built-in magnifier was garbage. We methodically went through and it didn't fix a single WCAG non-conformance. So anyway, I could talk all day on that, but I won't.
I think one of the most dangerous parts.
I would love to comment on that as well. I wrote an article. It's old now. I think I wrote it in like 2016, and I wrote, can overlays be part of your strategic plan to become accessible? Because to become accessible, you really do need a strategic plan, and you need to work the plan. And at the time I was hearing all these overlays, we can do it. And I agree that, well, I really can't think of an overlay that does work. I will defend Browse Aloud. Browse Aloud with text help doesn't say that they're an overlay and that you put this on your website and you're accessible. They are saying they are assistive technology tools that can help you as you do the work to be accessible. So I do just want to defend them, that they're not saying that they're an overlay. But the overlays, Steve mentioned accessibility. I always say to the corporations that I'm working with, you have to take the time to check the vendors out. And sometimes people get confused between some of the really good tools, like Tenon has possibilities, DQ has some possibilities, but those are not overlays. Anybody that thinks you can just overlay 3 lines of code and you're done, you're really looking for a lawsuit if you're in the United States. And then the National Federation of the Blind in the United States has come out against accessibility, telling all of their members not to use websites. But at the same time, they got an investment of something ridiculous, like $53 million. And the investors had talked to me before. I have a lot of investors that come to me. And I told them, don't invest in somebody that's not doing the right thing by our community. They did anyway. Okay, fine. I hope they lose all their money. Oh, sorry. But so I agree. I do agree with everything Steve's saying. And it is buyer beware. I can't speak for the UK market, but I promise you in the United States, it is buyer beware of what accessibility vendors and tools to use. And I have not seen any overlays that work, but I did want to defend Text Help. They're not saying they're an overlay. They're not saying, I really do not like the ones that say you do this overlay and you're done. And so technology can help us, but so far technology hasn't really helped us a lot with any of these tools. But some of the tools can help take you certain ways, but I have a big problem with accessibility and some of these. It seems like a lot of them have left the market. I don't even know, but I never recommend overlays anymore.
So yes on overlays, but you actually had 2 parts to your question. And so I'm going to answer the first part, which is about automated testing tools. And I think that they can be really, really useful. And in fact, really important, because there's so much technology that's happening and evolving so quickly. The standards are moving so quickly. We just cannot physically test all the pages that are out there for accessibility in a manual way. You need to use automated tools as a base for that. That's just, critical. And I posted a link to the Accessibility Insights tool that's a free tool based on X. But it doesn't stop with a lot of the better tools these days provide an automated scan for things that machines are good at, and then it also provides, here's a bunch of things that machines can't do yet that we want you to do. So go beyond the initial fast scan and dig in to find out, how does it work with keyboards? Can you zoom in and zoom out effectively to meet that criteria? It finds ways to help users evaluate the accessibility of their site. And it doesn't take an accessibility expert to use these. Another one that we use regularly and we recommend is WebAIM's Wave Toolbar. Again, it doesn't catch all the issues. It probably only catches about 1/3 of the accessibility issues out there. But it's amazing how many accessibility issues you can find that Wave identifies. Like it's really quite shocking how many there are and how easy it is to find them, even if you aren't a technologist.
And can when we talk about with the web consultants in our team, they always say 30-40% automated tools and then manual. And I am a partially sighted user with magnification. There's certain issues with magnification about layout that obviously you need a manual test. So, there are certain things that no matter how good the automated tool is, won't be picked up, but it's a good starting point, as Matt was saying.
Laurie, do you mind expanding on sort of, okay, you start with automated tools. What I mean, as a user experience evaluator, what do you do then to sort of round that out?
Well, usually as a user experience, we do expert assessments. So we try and pick up all the major issues before we do any user testing. So as you wouldn't put something that is completely rubbish in front of a sighted person or, a fully able-bodied person, then you wouldn't do the same thing if there are buttons unlabeled, for example, for a screen reader, the color contrast is white on yellow, things like that. So we try and pick up all the serious issues and some of the usability issues. So we would go through, and quite like the idea where WCAG 3.0 is going with user journeys and more looking at red routes and so on, because we do that. We do the tasks through the website, through the app, and looking what are the main things that you would be doing, and looking at doing it with the screen reader, with magnification, with high contrast, because you can't think, oh, this is a partially sighted person, they just need high, good color contrast and this font type and font size. Some people will invert the colors with Windows. How does it look like that? So we go through the journeys, using different scenarios and different technologies. So that is, something that I think people should become aware of. And I think going back to how do we get buy-in, a lot of the time we get asked by businesses, or can we do user testing so that we shock, the powers of be in the organizations to think about it seriously. And unfortunately, there's nothing better than seeing somebody struggle in using a website, and I know I have done it for people, and I was quite happily going by the task, and the people were shocked, about the difficulties, and it is good, but it shouldn't be done really. If we could do it in a better way, that would be ideal. But unfortunately, at the moment, it is, demonstrating the issues and having a video of somebody struggling and, taking 20 minutes to do something that takes 5 is what works. So right. Sorry.
That's quite sad, actually, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mike, I can see you've answered one. I want to go to some of the audience questions. I can see you've answered one in the chat around addressing accessibility issues in legacy applications.
Well, I gave one perspective as a vendor that sells, new software and accessible software alternatives. There are other opinions, but I just haven't. Maybe there's other people who think that there are better ways to deal with legacy tools than just replace them.
So the question was how to approach it with legacy tools, and Mike's answer was replace it with something new. Don't try to fix the legacy tool.
Well, I would take the opposite view. 20 years ago, Joel Spolsky, who is very well known in some circles, ex-product manager at Microsoft, he created Trello and various other things. He wrote a really good blog that basically says, don't throw away what you've got. It's got so much embedded knowledge in it that you have forgotten about. And if you build it from scratch, you'll put back in all the bugs that you just spent years fixing because you forgot that you fixed them, and you'll get all of them wrong again. Realistically, there's probably no right answer. And I'd say it probably depends how inaccessible your product is. And this is something we do day in, day out. The first step is fact-finding. Do some testing to find out how good or bad it is. And that can be very lightweight, sometimes half a day. You look at it and you think, oh my God, this is just horrific. You take it out the back and shoot it. Other times you think it's pretty bad, but it's fixable. And then the next stage is to look at what's involved in fixing it, talk to the developers. Can you do all of these things? Are there any you can't do? And come up with a roadmap there will be some quick wins, stuff you can do low risk right now, some intermediate things that might take a few months, and some things you just can't do till a rebuild. And then when you look at what that would leave you with, and you think, well, it will take this long, it'll cost us this much, and it'll be done by that date. Is that better than starting again, spending 3 times as much to rebuild from scratch, taking 3 times as long? Yes, it'll be better, but there are commercial things to weigh up. Will you ever get a return on investment if you throw it away and rebuild? So you have that choice, and we've got a workflow to help people deal with it.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to go to another question from the audience, from Isabel G. What's best practice for ensuring web content that is photography or visual-led, or even soundscape-led? So creating, good content like that's truly accessible and engaging without excluding anyone. Who wants to jump in on that? Ramon?
I think that the proper use of the descriptions, captions, even if it's an audio description to something that is written. So there are other ways to present any piece of content. And actually, I'm looking here at the next question as well that refers to tables and how to deal with some of the user needs are contradictory. And I think the answer for those two is basically the same. There are different ways to present the same content. And if you feel that there is the need to use different ways to present that same content, then you just should go ahead and do that and give the people the option to consume that content in the best way that works for them, not just dictate, I want this to be presented this way. And whoever doesn't work for, doesn't understand that, well, too bad. Well, no, do the work and present it in all the possible ways that you can to make it inclusive for everybody.
Anyone else want to add to that one? I guess one of the things is social media often, I would say, is photography visual led and soundscape led. A lot of the things that are on there, you know, if you go on Instagram, for example, or on Twitter, you know, it tends to be quite visual. And it appears that a lot of people aren't aware of the accessibility tools within these applications to just do the basics right, like alt text and things like that. So I guess that's, you know, on social media, but we should be doing that, I guess, across the board when we're creating content for websites as well.
Yeah, well, the social media giants, they have the resources and the technology to automate a lot of those things. Like Facebook, they will actually use artificial intelligence to recognize what is in a photo to automatically write a description for it. If you don't have that technology, you kind of have to write it yourself. And it makes a big difference, especially with a big website that has a lot of content, or if there are videos, like lots of videos that have tons of content and you have to present that content in a different way. It takes a lot of work. But the options are there. That's what I wanted to say.
That's so true.
And Matt, I would also say that we often talk about these things just from the lens of websites, but it has to be everything. It has to be, I remember talking to one of our customers and they were saying, well, we don't put those videos on our website. That's one of our partners that creates it. And I said, is it on your website? Well, yes. Well, then you own that content. I don't care who created it. So I always talk about ICT, Internet Communications and Technology, because we want access to everything. We want access to be able to go in the store and do the online checkouts. We want our apps accessible. We want our websites accessible. And once again, when you go to the real leaders in the industries that are making the difference, you have multiple here. You've got RNIB, you've got, what Steve is doing, what Mike is doing, what you're doing, Matt. So take the time. And I actually love, once again, what you're doing at CyberDuck, because I want CyberDuck to know how to do it. And I think it's great that you're working with the industry, with other partners, so you get it right. But sometimes it's so frustrating for the corporations that do, or anybody that wants to do it right, that the vendors that they use to build their websites or build their technologies or their apps, they don't know what you're talking about. I remember not that long ago, I asked somebody about accessibility and they're like, oh yeah, you can get online 24/7. Well, golly, I actually knew you could get online 24/7. That is not the accessibility I'm talking about. And so there's still a lot of confusion and misunderstanding and a lot of wonderful resources. You have some great questions being asked in the chat, not only in the Q&A, just FYI. And so you have to take the time to make sure you're working with the right people. And once again, I'm saying that a lot from the US perspective, but you'll know it's not just from the US. Take the time to work with credible people that actually employ people with disabilities too. If your firm doesn't employ people with disabilities and you're in the accessibility field, that's fine. I just would prefer to use a company that is including the community and their employment as well.
Thanks, Deborah. Yeah, I think there's obviously a valid point there as well, is that a lot of services don't only live online. You know, they often have a real world element to them as well, and making sure that whole service is accessible, not just a bit online.
So I have 3 quick points. One, somebody mentioned something about the Guardian doing a really amazing interactive collage thing, and I can't find it, but that should be something that we should share as an example, because there's nothing like an example to go off and inspire other people to go off and emulate it.
I think it's Laurie's organization that was involved in that.
Yes, cool. It was. That's it.
Auditorial. Yeah, is the project. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's all right.
The other is the in terms of looking at contradictory needs. This is where personalization comes in. We need to be thinking about more than just one website for everyone. There is no website that will meet everyone's needs. We need to be able to encourage more opportunities for personalization. Low vision users' needs are very different from the needs of people who are dyslexic. So let's try and find ways to give people the option to present the content in a way that is most usable for them. And finally, in terms of the future, I mean, absolutely. Like in terms of the web is just, I mean, the web was invented, was it 30 years ago now? Like this is old tech. You know, so many people are using oral tools like Alexa and Siri to go off and engage with their technology, which happens to sit on the web. But there's also virtual reality, augmented reality. These things are not some part of like a distant future that we need to dream about in sci-fi. This is here now. So we need to be thinking about how we build accessibility into these tools now before we start our next big project that involves them.
Absolutely. Deborah, you raised a good point. There are some good questions in the chat. Laurie, there's a question from Julia, which said, you mentioned taking accessibility into account from the start, but how do you go about it when there's an existing product that we want to change?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Usually it's, if you're thinking of changing something, that's the easiest place to start. We always like, oh, we're creating a new website. And I think, excellent, you've come at the right time. When it's an existing one, then, it's unfortunately, it's retrofitting. But I think, trying to skill up as well, the people, you often go to businesses and there might be one accessibility champion who is trying to lead that team and drag it and put accessibility, but then you get this patchy work within one organization where one user journey might be accessible but the rest collapses, and there's not much point in that. So it's skilling up, and I suppose training goes so far, but it depends how much is embedded, and actually the organizations make it as part of their culture, something that I worked with one bank a few years ago, that I showed them the screen readers on phones, and I went back after sprints to check things, and then a couple of months later they were using VoiceOver on the phone, and I thought that's brilliant, because actually they are living it. They took it home and used it for a week, and it takes effort, and it takes commitment, but in the end, I think if you see the use, on the other side, and you see people using it and being able to be empowered. I mean, I always say digital world has empowered me. I'm independent because of the accessible apps and the accessible websites. I don't need to ask other people. And I think it's when you realize that that's the difference you're making, hopefully people will say, okay, it's worth the effort, and carry on. But yeah, going back to the original, because I digress as usual, it is difficult when you're starting with something already set. The best moment is thinking, okay, are we, I think as Steve said, deciding whether it's worth carrying on with something that is inaccessible or scrapping it. And then that's when you try and skill up your workforce and get experts in that can help you.
I have an example of this. We work with a lot of clients at CyberDuck in the public sector, and in the public sector, historically, a lot of content will sit within documents like PDFs. Any tips on, where to start? A lot of these organizations have thousands of PDFs. There's a lot of historical content that sits within these documents. Where do you start with that?
Okay, I'll take that one then, because that's something we do a lot of. And as is so often the case, the first step is fact-finding. What have you got? How many PDFs are there? What is their usage? Have you got any analytics that will tell you how often they're accessed? Have you had any complaints? Do you have a customer service desk who are logging complaints that the PDFs are not accessible, because that would help you possibly prioritize the order in which you fix them. Then you'll usually divide them up into categories. And that's certainly the case with the public sector, because any PDFs prior to 2018 are potentially exempt. Not necessarily, but potentially. And so you might have 2, 3, 4 different categories of documents, such as frequently used, infrequently used, exempt from the regs, new ones. And you need to develop policies for how you're going to deal with each different type. Because for low usage ones and exempt ones, you might choose to only fix them on demand. So you leave them on the website and you just put some text there that says, if you find this document inaccessible, please contact us here and we'll provide an accessible version within 10 working days. And depending where you're starting from, that might cover a huge proportion of your documents, because realistically fixing them all is unaffordable. You know, I've got clients with tens of thousands of legacy PDFs.
Steve, I have to disagree with you, Steve, just because it's more fun this way. So I would say that you don't start by doing a survey. You start by not making the problem worse. You make an organizational policy to stop producing PDFs. PDFs are a limited, they're useful for some things, but they will never be fully accessible. And I think we have to get around that idea that PDFs are going to continue to be useful for us. They're a legacy format. They're never going to be good for low vision users. They're always going to be fragile and they won't work for smartphone users. So the first step is to get rid of PDFs so that we don't keep making the problem worse. After we've done that, then we have to look at all of the legacy tools, and absolutely everything you said is golden. But first, stop making the problem worse.
Well, I don't think we're disagreeing, because I said one of the categories would be new documents, and one of the considerations is, can you not make PDFs? But realistically, in some organizations that have no web development capability at all, and you have secretaries taking meeting minutes in a Word document that they convert to PDF, that takes minutes and costs nothing to create the PDF. To provide them with a way of putting that on the web is much harder. It takes time and money. Also, some documents need to be portable. You need archived versions that are frozen in time at the time they were created. People need to be able to read offline, which, okay, you theoretically can do with the web version. It's not as easy as saying as just do everything as HTML. Yeah.
I'm gonna move the discussion on a little bit here, because we've only got a few minutes left, and there's tons of really good questions.
Can I please just make one comment? I'm not disagreeing with either one of them, but I would also say we addressed a lot of this with PDFs, and the United States government said we're not going to stop using PDFs. It's not going to happen. Of course, Adobe also does not want them to stop. So even though I understand what Mike is saying, and I agree, I mean, let's just make it easy, but the reality is there are a lot of customers that are not going to stop using PDFs. It's just a reality. So if you haven't started, I think there's some wonderful resources, but I just want to tell you, I fought those battles with our large clients, and they don't want to hear it. So I just want to give one more perspective. Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
No, that's absolutely fine. And some people in the chat have mentioned that as well, is that often the web team don't actually have control over that, and it's being enforced on them. There was a question around what's the alternative then? I mean, you know, web pages might seem like the obvious answer there, but what if PDFs are being produced, is there other document formats that could be used by those teams who are producing the PDFs who are perhaps not part of the web team?
I mean, there's EPUB is one standard that's often distributed with Kindles and other kinds of e-readers. The other one is MHTML, which is a mobile text format. Those are two viable options. But don't forget about, like, so often these organizations are writing the documents in Word. If you just ship the Word document, that's going to be more accessible than shipping a PDF version of the Word document. And yes, both are equally editable. So there's nothing to stop a person from editing a Word document or a PDF. So the idea that we have around PDFs being more secure or more frozen in time, yeah, not really. It's all relative.
Well, you can secure a PDF or create a PDFA version, which can't be saved, edited and saved as PDFA. EPUB, I'm not sure it's more accessible. And actually what you said about Word documents being more accessible than the resulting PDF isn't always true. There are certain things that actually happen in the conversion process that make the PDF more accessible than the original. Sounds counterintuitive, but it actually happens.
I guess it all depends on the production of and the starting point and how people use the accessibility tools. Caitlin, I can see you've asked a really good question, which is what is the difference between accessibility and inclusive design? I think that is probably a panel in itself. We can probably talk for an hour about that. Deborah, I can see you're writing an answer to that. There is a question that I would like to ask, and it probably is the last one we'll be able to get through in this session, which is it's around teams. And the question's from Al Clark, which is he's a program manager at Microsoft. He was a program manager at Microsoft where the primary focus was accessibility, so he's not a stranger to it. But when he moved to another company and trying to advocate for accessibility within the product range, are there any good resources or approaching these discussions with decision makers?
One thing that I found quite useful, there is a Slack team. It's called A11Y. It's just that, and there are thousands of people there, and every time that anybody has asked a question there or comes with a doubt or with asking for advice about anything, there's always somebody there to help and to answer. So I've found that as an invaluable resource since I've been a member of that community.
Mike, you've got something at CivicActions that you're developing at the moment, the accessibility toolkit, or I forget, is it playbook, sorry?
We've got a playbook and a guidebook, and we're just trying to pull together resources about best practices for accessibility, and also try and find examples where there's good material that we can build on. So we don't want to replicate it, but we want to be able to build on good information. So for example, there's some great stuff on roles that the US government has provided, and the UK government have done some work on this as well. We're trying to combine it and find other ways to build on and share resources to say, how can we talk to people who are project managers, who are developers, who are designers or graphics people? How do we try and make sure that all of the roles know what their responsibilities are? And absolutely, executives are one of those roles. They need to understand why it matters and how they can play a role in making sure that accessibility is given up a priority that it needs. And one way that I would recommend to do this is just to look for a precedent. If there's a competitor that's doing a better job with accessibility, point to them and say, hey, check out what they're doing. You know, we're not even, you know, if we want to keep up, we have to keep up with them. So find your competitor who's doing a better job. There will be one.
Thanks, Mike. I don't think we're going to have time for more questions now, but there was a really interesting point, which is around the makeup of teams and making sure that your teams are diverse and that your teams contain people that may have different disabilities so that you are having those perspectives. I think maybe this is a topic for another panel, but I think that the makeup of what your team looks like, I think, is a really interesting topic. So thank you to the person who raised that in the chat. I think we should wrap up now because we're over 5 o'clock, and I know obviously we've taken an hour of everybody's time. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you to our audience for your time coming along to our panel or roundtable today. I hope you found the discussion interesting and informative. I'm sure you will join me in the chat to say thank you, especially to our panelists as well. For their time and insights today. I think they've all been brilliant and very clear and cogent with us. And, thank you to all of you for your time in joining us. It's been really enjoyable, for me, completely selfishly, listening to the discussion going on. couple of final housekeeping points. As I mentioned earlier, everyone who has signed up will receive an email next week, providing them access to the on-demand video of the session. And in the meantime, in the chat, there have been a lot of resources shared. So we'll try to include those on our email next week, sort of do a roundup of those. And yeah, please do go and check them out. So thank you everyone for your time.